Let's pray this morning. Heavenly Father, it's good to worship you. It's good to worship you with your people. Whether those are people I've met before or not, it really doesn't matter. It's just awesome to be able to sing your praises with other Christians. Lord, as we approach your word today, it has real things to say to real people. It touches us where we are. It deals with what we really feel. It deals with the struggles we really have. And Lord, I pray that especially this morning that we would peel back any kind of plastic Christianity and get to the heart of the reality of the struggles we face as Christians and the faith that you called us to. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. The title of this sermon is Just Believe, or Only Believe, and where that comes from will become apparent real quick. We're in Mark chapter 5. Mark chapter 5, if you want to get there. If you need a Bible and you didn't bring one, there are some on that back wall, but of course in this day and age, many of us have devices where you can just turn your Bible on. And if that isn't enough, we'll have it up on the screen as well in different portions. We've been going through Mark. We're still up in Galilee though. The book of Mark starts in Galilee and it stays there a really long time. Galilee is a region up north of Judea. So Judea is where Jerusalem is and the temple is and all that. And then you have Samaria above that. And above that is the region of Galilee. And it's where Jesus is from. Nazareth is in Galilee. And so when we say Jesus of Nazareth, that's a town in Galilee. But as an adult, at this point in his life, in his 30s, Jesus has been living in a town called Capernaum. It's also the town that Peter lives in. And in Capernaum, there's a synagogue. It would have been the same synagogue that Jesus went to. And last week, we were introduced to an official of the synagogue. His name was Jairus. And a lot of what we're pretty much all of today is going to be talking about Jairus. We were introduced to him last week. Last week we started his story, and yet his story gets interrupted by this woman who's sick. And if you'd like to hear that sermon, it's online. You can listen to it anytime you want. I'm not going to re-preach it, obviously. But we do have to cover some stuff again, because we really do need to set the stage of what's going on. So we're starting in Mark chapter 5, in verse 21. And here's what I'm going to do first. Because we're trying to get Jairus' perspective, I'm going to skip the internal thought process of the woman with the health issue. We're going to read 21 through 24, and then we're going to skip to 30 through 34. And what we're trying to get is we're trying to reset that stage of the headspace that Jairus is in. Where is he at? What's his story? So starting in verse 21 of Mark chapter 5. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue rulers, named Jairus, came there. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him. "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And now we're going to skip to verse 30. So they're walking with this crowd. It's big. Remember, this crowd is thousands of people, so it's oozing towards Capernaum. And in verse 30, and at once Jesus realized the power had gone out of him, and he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" You see the people crowding against you, his disciples answered, and yet you can ask, "Who touched me?" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened, came what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." That's the story so far from Jairus's, I say that wrong all the time, Jairus's perspective. He doesn't know about the woman except what she says. I know I covered this last week, but there's scene setting we need to do. Jesus has just returned from an unexpected, at least everybody else, trip across the lake. The Sea of Galilee is a lake. While he's gone, or at least shortly afterwards, a tabernacle official from Jesus' home church in Capernaum comes to the spot where Jesus is teaching, and he's not there. And his child is at the point of death. But of course, this tabernacle is where Jesus started preaching the word again, or the word. This is the tabernacle where Jesus cast out that first demon. This is the town where Jesus went and visited Peter's mother, and hordes of people came after that. This tabernacle official knows all about the fact that Jesus can heal. He starts the story with faith. This official starts the story believing that Jesus can heal his daughter. It's a great place to start. He starts where maybe we would start as Christians. Faith that Jesus can heal. Faith that Jesus can handle it. Faith that Jesus has got it under control. He starts the story with faith. So far, so good. He finds Jesus, and Jesus says he'll go. But instead of Jairus and Jesus kind of sprinting the distance between the lake and the town, and then racing through the streets to go save his daughter, who is at the point of death. She's going to die right now. That's not what happens. I talked about last week. Have you ever done the crowd shuffle? When this is thousands of people, and they all want to go see what Jesus is going to do. And the whole mob is moving towards Capernaum, which means they are not moving rapidly. And I can only imagine that Jairus' blood pressure is going up continuously as he thinks about, come on, we need to move here. What are we doing with all these people? Let's just go. And that isn't what's happening. So as I said before, as they're kind of oozing towards town, from Jairus' perspective, Jesus stops for no particular reason at all to ask why someone touched his clothes. Okay, why is Jesus asking who touched his clothes? And of course, even the disciples are shocked, right, from the passage. What are they saying? They said, his disciples answered, "And yet you can ask, who touched me? You see all the people crowding against you," in verse 31. And his disciples answered, "And yet you can ask, who touched me?" It's a big, crunched, shuffly, bouncing crowd. People have been bouncing into Jesus continually as they move forward. And the disciples are saying, "Why are you asking us who touched your clothes, Jesus? This makes no sense whatsoever. Tons of people have been running into you the whole trip." And when I put myself in Jairus' shoes, I'm afraid that I'm getting angrier. So what happens next in verse 33? This woman falls down, fearing and trembling. And what does it say in verse 33? It says that she told him the whole truth. The whole truth. The whole story. Now, look. Here in Mark has digested everything down to nice, neat sentences, gotten rid of all the extra bits. He's only included exactly what we need to know. He said it very concisely and very neatly. Have you ever talked to a hysterical person before in your life? Is that how they talk? No. No. What are they doing? And there was a guy, and I tried all the doctors, and then they never got well. Let's start from the beginning. She's got to grind through the whole truth. On the ground, shaking, trembling with fear. This didn't happen like that. This wasn't some, oh, yes, Jesus, and some sort of concisely pre-prepared speech. She didn't even want Jesus to notice her. She wanted to get healed and leave. She doesn't have some speech prepared. She wants to get out of there. And the longer this little episode takes, and as her story comes out, I put myself in Jairus' shoes, and my rage is going off the Richter scale. You've been sick for 12 years, and you couldn't wait 1 hour for my daughter who is dying right this second to get healed. What are you doing? Shut up. I'm just telling you what I would feel if I was Jairus. What are you doing? Why are you slowing us down? Could you not have waited until we got to my daughter who is dying right this second? You've been sick for 12 years. What difference is a couple hours is going to mean? Stop! Everyone just stop. Let's go. And then the punch in the gut of verse 35, which I haven't read yet. And while Jesus is still speaking, some men come from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. Your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore? Wow. This is a passage, is a moment, is a point in history with incredibly deep emotion. And if we read this and we don't feel the frustration and the anguish of Jairus, we miss basically everything. Because this is a story of a person's faith tested to the limit. He started this with faith. He started this believing that Jesus could heal. And yet it seems as if every detail has conspired against him, and it hasn't worked. His daughter is dead. My daughter was dying, and I had faith, and I went to Jesus. So why did Jesus have to go across the lake? Why is this silly crowd allowed to go with us? Why couldn't this lady wait a few more hours? Why did Jesus stop? She was already healed. Why did he have to stop? If he'd kept going, she still would have been healed. What are we doing here? Why? And if anyone has ever experienced tragedy at all, you've asked all these same questions. Right? And they come unbidden. They come without trying. They come even if you don't want them to come. Questions like, why didn't she put her seatbelt on? Why did that guy have to get behind the wheel when he was drunk? Why did the ambulance take so long? Why didn't God change something? Couldn't he have changed something? He's God, right? He's omnipotent, right? He can do whatever he wants, right? Why didn't God change something? Why is my loved one dead? Or why have I lost this? We ask those questions, and that's the reality of being human. That's what happens when tragedy hits. That's what happens to me. That's what's happening to him. And one of the side effects of believing in an all-powerful God is that it leaves us wondering why he didn't stop my pain before it happened. And so it's with that level of conflict that we've got to read the rest of what happens. And we've got to understand what Jesus says in response. In verse 36, ignoring what they said, Jesus told the synagogue ruler, don't be afraid, just believe. We're going to get to the tension between that command and what he's feeling in a second, but we've got to understand that is rough. So let's read the rest of the story now from Mark 35, 5:35 to 43. While Jesus was still speaking, some men came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Ignoring what they said, Jesus told the synagogue ruler, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue ruler, Jesus saw a commotion, with people crying and wailing loudly. And he went in and he said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with them and went into where the child was. He took her by the hand and he said to her, "Talitha koum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately, the girl stood up and walked around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this, and he told them to give her something to eat. Hallelujah. A lot of people know that Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. If I were to say, name the people that Jesus raised from the dead, I think most people would go, Lazarus and some other people. So this is one of those other people. This is one of the other people besides Lazarus that Jesus raises from the dead. We're going to do two things. First, we're going to pull this apart a little bit, this next part of the passage, and try to understand it completely. And then we're going to probe into one of the most tender areas of our lives as Christians, which is how we deal with loss. Let's start going through this and trying to understand exactly what's going on. Jairus' daughter is dead, and all the what-ifs and all the finality of that crushing grief is there. Thus far, in Jairus' mind, now if we might piece together Gospels, and we might piece together that maybe Jesus raised somebody else from the dead before this, depending on how you work your chronology, but I don't know that Jairus knew that. But here's what he's got. He's got, my daughter is dead. I just got told that she's dead, what all the grief and all the emotions and all that is. And then Jesus' command of, don't fear, only believe. And it's possible that if you're still young, or if you haven't been a Christian for very long, that you have never lived with this particular tension personally. But if you've been a Christian for any length of time at all, you probably understand what he's feeling. There's got to be some moment of your life when you've had to live in this same place. I'm hurt, I'm angry, I'm depressed, I'm lost, I'm overwhelmed by grief, yet I know Jesus is asking me not to be afraid and just to believe. Have you ever felt that tension? Those of you who know me know that my sister's a paraplegic. She lives in a wheelchair. She's paralyzed from the waist down. She was 15 when that happened. That was a really long time ago. There was a place in that journey where we're doing this, right? You know that at first she can't walk, and the doctor's like, yeah, but she might come back, and you don't never know, and she might walk, and we don't know yet. And then they get the phone call, no, she's not going to walk again. And then you're digesting that, and part of you is grieving, and angry, and lost, and all these things, and yet you know as a Christian, you know by who you are, you know by your faith, that you're not supposed to be afraid, you're only supposed to believe, and you're living in the middle of that tension. Most of us have lived there some point. It's not the most comfortable place to be. And that is exactly where Jairus is at. And this is the emotional background, and for many of us it's all too familiar. So what do we get overlaid on top of that? Well, the first thing that happens is that all the stuff that Jairus wanted them to do before now starts to happen. What do I mean by that? What's the first thing that Jesus does after the news that she's dead in verse 37? He did not let anyone follow them except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Okay. She's going to die. She's dying. You need to get to her because it's almost too late, and he's traveling with thousands of people going this fast. Now she's dead. It's too late. She's already dead. She's dead now. It's done. She's dead. Oh, now he dismisses thousands of people, and we go with just 5 to get over there fast, and we can run now. Great. Why didn't we do that before? Why now? Isn't that always the way? Everyone starts to take everything serious after the bad thing happens. After the car accident, everyone starts wearing their seatbelts and ignoring their cell phones. And surely this simply adds more fuel to Jairus' already emotional fire. I'd have a hard time not imagining Jairus thinking, Jesus, why is it that you only started taking the situation seriously after it was too late? That doubt, that frustration. Sure, now that it's too late, you take it serious. Now that it's too late, you're going to go fast. What does it matter now? She's already dead. Why didn't you do this earlier? So Jesus is finally making rapid progress, unhampered by the extra several thousand people. And they get to verse 38. When they come to the home of the synagogue ruler, Jesus saw commotion, with people crying and wailing loudly. I do need to do a little bit of Jewish culture stuff with you now. I'm not going to get too far into it, but dying in Jewish culture is a pretty complicated thing. There's a lot of steps, and a lot of people make a lot of money when you die, because everyone gets paid. But there's a 7-step process to dying. And somebody has to come and verify the person's dead, and then there's mourners. They're professional people who are going to cry and weep and make a big fuss, but they get paid too. And there's going to be embalmers and pallbearers and other people, and it's quite long. So the commotion people outside, that means some things have happened. First of all, it means that the medical examiner person that comes and uses some test to ascertain that the person's really dead, they've already been there. They've come and done their little check, and yep, sure enough, she's dead. Yep, you guys can go now. So then all the mourners start doing their wailing and mourning thing, and then they're going to set the scene for it being depressing and wailing. And so when Jairus comes and sees that the mourners are already started in with their bit, he knows that the person who's supposed to come and verify the death, the person who's done the, yes, you're done, you really are dead, that person, they've already come and verified, she's gone. The level of finality ramps up yet another step. Maybe they were mistaken. Maybe someone didn't know. Maybe she just passed out, and maybe he's got that little bit of a hope, right? We're bargaining, and we're not quite sure, and we're not quite believing, and we're in that denial stage, maybe. But when he sees the mourners outside, all that starts to slough off as he realizes that the person who medically examines someone to make sure they're dead is already verified. She's dead. That isn't a good moment for him. And he's still trying to believe. But it's getting harder. How do we think he's doing on the absolute panic versus don't fear, only believe scale? Probably a little rough. And then Jesus speaks against what seems to be real in verse 39. Jesus went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." He speaks truth. By the way, Jesus always speaks truth. I mean, that's a given. But he's speaking truth against what seems to be real. We're going to come back to this statement, but for now, let's move on. But Jesus, confronted with all this data, confronted with the grievers, confronted with the home, confronted with the news, Jesus' response is, she's not dead. She's sleeping. Verse 40, they laugh. They laughed at him. Who laughed at him? And then he says, and they laughed at him, but after he put them all out. What they and what them laughed and did he put out? I would suggest that the they that laughed and the them he put out are all the professional people that are there to do the jobs that go with being dead. I don't suspect that this is the mom and dad laughing. I don't suspect that. If my child just died, I don't think there's anything anyone could say to me that would make me laugh. We know that Jesus didn't send away the parents, because it immediately says that that's the people that he takes into the room with him. There were a lot of people there, and I would suggest that the laughers are the people present. The professional mourners, the coroners, the embalmers, the pallbearers, the crowd of experts, who are happy to remind everyone that this is their job, that they know what they are talking about. Those people. And is it just me, or do people like this seem to come out of the woodwork whenever we face loss? Experts who scoff at our hope or at our pain or whatever. People who are more than ready to tell us how it really is and how we should react and how it should be easy and why don't we just get over it. People who seem to know better than we do about whatever situation we're in. Do those people ever show up when we're in grief? I think they do. People who say silly, silly things. Sometimes as a Christian community, we can be cruel. Someone loses a child, or someone loses a parent, or someone loses whatever, and we say something, oh, it'll be okay, God loves you. And it doesn't help. Look what Jesus does to the scoffers, to the laughers, to the people who think they know better. He puts them out. He puts them out. After he put them out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him. That's verse 40. May I suggest that we do exactly the same thing, if not physically, then emotionally and intellectually. There are people that we need to put out of our lives when we're in grief and we're in pain and we're struggling, we're trying to keep faith and we're having a hard time. And then the scoffers come to laugh at our faith, to laugh at everything we're trying to do, to laugh at the Word of God, to laugh at whatever. May I suggest they're not helpful. There is a time in our lives as Christians to reach out. There is a time in our lives as Christians to put out. Not every situation is a time for us to go evangelize the lost. Sometimes we need the lost to get out of our face so we can do the business we got to do. And they're not helpful. Jesus takes the people that are dragging it down and who will not believe and who do not have faith, and he's removing them from the equation so that the parents can try to deal with what's going on. And it's exactly what he needed to do, and it's exactly what we need to do sometimes. The next thing that happens He went into where the child was, and he took her by the hand, and he says to her, Talitha Koum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. And immediately the girl stood up and walked around. She was 12 years old. And at this, they were completely astonished. Do you believe God can raise people from the dead?
Amen.
I mean, do you really believe that God can raise people from the dead? We talk about God raising people from the dead, and we read about it, and we say it happened, and not just Jesus, but even the apostles, we talk about people being raised from the dead. But if we were to talk about raising the dead like today, it might make us a little uncomfortable. Jesus raises her from the dead. She was dead. She's not dead anymore. That's what happened. She wasn't sick. She wasn't passed out. She was not in a coma. She was dead. Jesus raises her from the dead. If we, see, here's the thing. Somehow we can intellectually talk about that. But if we really can't get that Jesus can raise us from the dead, where's our hope in the resurrection? Where's our hope in living forever in heaven with Christ if we don't believe God can raise people from the dead? Where is the hope if we don't actually believe He can do that?
Amen.
And I fear that there are Christians in this world that have an intellectualism about some story, but when it really comes down to it, they don't have a lot of belief. I think that can be true. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this, and he told them to give her something to eat. We're back to the don't tell anybody thing. This has been a theme through Mark over and over. He does something amazing, and he says, don't tell anybody yet. It's happened several times. At a minimum, this is what it means. Jesus did not heal this girl for the notoriety. He didn't heal it so he could get more famous, and he already was. He was already plenty famous. He didn't do this so that everybody could get so excited about what Jesus was doing. Jesus healed this girl because he wanted to heal the girl. Because he loved the girl. And he loved her family, and he wanted to do this. And if he wanted this to be some sort of big publicity stunt, he would have said, go tell everyone. He doesn't say that. He says, don't tell anybody. Which means his motive wasn't to get advertising. It was just to heal the girl. The fact that he tells her to get her something to eat, so we got her walking and eating, I would say that's a pretty strong indication this girl is doing just fine. If she can walk around and eat something, she's no longer anywhere near dead. She's doing okay. And that's the end of the story. It's both powerful and it's beautiful. But as we move towards applying this to our lives, however, that's where things get harder again. See, this is a fantastic story, but there's some things I don't get to promise. I don't get to promise that if you only quit fearing and believe that your dead relative will come back to life. See, I run into a stop there. I don't get to promise that. I don't get to promise you that your chronic illness will leave you forever, or that if you've lost a limb, it'll grow back, or that my sister who's paralyzed from the waist down, that she'll definitely get to walk again. I don't get to promise those things. So we have this incredible story about faith, a person who had faith, who had that faith challenged, who Jesus walked with, who there was this amazing ending, and yet as I start to apply it to my own life, now it gets harder again. See, we got to start from the beginning one more time as we start to understand how this applies to us. So let's go back to where Jesus started with Jairus. We're going to really focus on the three things that Jesus said and how those things communicate to us and what we've got to gain from them now in the 21st century as we try to live our lives. It starts with verse 36. Ignoring what they said, Jesus told the synagogue ruler, "Don't be afraid, just believe." Okay, let's think that through. Is that a promise? Not really. It's a command. The command in his tragedy, the command in Jairus' mess, as he's approached with this horrible news, as he's wrestling with his internal emotions, Jesus doesn't actually promise anything. He makes a command about where he needs to stand. You started with faith, this is how you continue in faith. Do not fear, only believe. That's the instruction. That's how you march forward. That's how you move on from here. Look, the story could have gone all different kinds of ways from that statement. There's all different ways that Jesus could have handled it from here, but I'm telling you that in our grief and in our moment of pain as a Christian, when we hit that, Jesus is telling you, do not fear, only believe. I gotta tell you, I would have no right to tell that to you. Me, Keith Stark, would have no right to tell you that. Why? Because I fear and I wrestle with my belief all the time. I can't, from some position of authority or greatness or perfection, reach down to you and say, "Oh, you should just not fear anymore. You should only believe." And you might look at me and go, "Well, who are you to tell me that?" Nobody. Here's where the rubber hits the road, though. Jesus has every right to tell you, do not fear, only believe. Jesus has every right to speak into your life that way. And he is. And whatever it is that you're facing, whatever tragedy, no matter how hard it seems, no matter how confusing or ugly or messed up it is, I'm telling you, Jesus is looking into your life right now and he's saying, do not fear, only believe. Those are Jesus' words to you, and he has a right to say them. Me, no. I should just have compassion and go, wow, that sounds really rough. I do have to tell you, though, Jesus' instructions to you are, do not fear, only believe. This command doesn't ask us to understand. It doesn't tell us what's going to happen next. It doesn't change based on how grim the circumstances look. It is an act of the will. It is a choice against every human urge. I, in my life, have reached points over and over again where I have thought, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. I don't know how to manage. I don't know the way. I've been there. But I've known that Jesus' request of me was to believe that God has a reason, to believe that God has a plan, to believe that the pain will not last forever, to believe that he still loves me, to just continue believing. It is a hard command, but it is a good command. Because as difficult as it is, this command becomes the anchor that keeps us from being blown to oblivion in the midst of the storm. This is what holds us together. Isn't it? When everything seems to be chaos and I can't figure out what's going on, I don't have any control, and there's doctors with my kid, or whatever is going on, what else do I have to hold on to except don't fear, only believe? What else do I have? That's what I've got. And without it, I wouldn't have anything at all. And as hard as this is, it is the anchor that we're supposed to latch onto in the midst of our complete not getting it moment. So Jesus' command Do not be afraid, just believe. It is a categorical command. It is a command for every awful situation. It is a command regardless of what the outcome turns out to be. It is the command of how we are supposed to react when our world explodes. Do not fear, just believe. The second thing that Jesus says is when he shows up to the house and he says, "Why make a commotion and weep? The child is only asleep." You may or may not be aware, but this is the exact way that the New Testament describes Christians who have died and are awaiting resurrection, at least most of the time. It is a very common way for the New Testament to refer to dead Christians. They are asleep. This isn't coincidence. This attitude about a temporary, this isn't permanent. They're just sleeping. Why is that the way the New Testament describes Christians? Because we're going to get back up. It's like anyone who sleeps. You may sleep a short time, you may sleep a long time, but you are waking up. It is happening. In other words, if you're a Christian, if Jesus has saved you from your sin, he proclaims the same thing over you at your death. You are only asleep. Some are healed now. All will be healed in eternity. Some will be raised now. Could be raised now. That could happen. Someday all will be raised that are in Christ. It is not trite. It is the truth. We talk about such things at funerals, and for good reason. If our hope in the resurrection is false, and I am a desperately wicked man selling you a lie. But our hope is not false. And though we wait in hope. We do not wait in fear. Grief, yes. Personal loss, yes. But not in fear for our loved ones that go to be with the Lord. They are only asleep. Whether he raised them now or he raised them later, it is temporary. This proclamation on this girl is the proclamation on every single Christian in the world. Though you die, you are only asleep. It should cause us to live in a completely different way, shouldn't it? It should change the way we react to death. It should change the way we react to danger and to threat. It should change every single bit of my outlook of the way I live if I really believe that those who die in Christ, they're only asleep. Well, they might sleep longer, they might sleep less, but they're only asleep. They'll wake up. They're going to wake up. Jesus' promise again isn't just to the little girl, it isn't just to the family, it's to every Christian. And so even in the worst of our grief and loss and pain, we carry on with a different kind of hope that the rest of the world surely cannot possibly fathom. Yes, I have lost them, but they're only asleep. We will be reunited for far longer than we were separated. Comparatively speaking, in eternity forward, we will look back at this brief blip when we were not together and go, why did we ever worry about that? It was such a short time. As we love and live together into eternity, and eternity, and eternity. The separation here might be painful for a moment, but it's a really short moment. It's hard to live there, but it doesn't change the fact that it's true. So Jesus' proclamation over this girl is for all of us. I do have a question for you, though. Because the next thing that Jesus says is, little girl, I say to you, arise. Little girl, I say to you, arise. Here's the most important question I could ask this morning of any person's life, period. Will Jesus one day say those words about you? will one day Jesus say, of you, you arise? This is a big question. Because if he's not going to say those words about you, then your death is permanent. Your death leads to something terrible. Your death is not bright. But if Jesus is going to say about you one day, arise. That's amazing hope. It isn't just death. You know what? I talked about my sister, her name was Christy. Someday Jesus will say, Christy, I say to you, arise. And my sister will not only live again, she will walk again. Someday Jesus will say to my mom, I say to you, arise. And my mother will not only live again, she will never suffer from anxiety or depression or dementia again. She will rise to perfection. She will rise to health. She will rise to a health that I can't even imagine because we have never lived in the kind of health that we will experience then. We can't even imagine it. We grieve our loved ones. But the words of Christ to Jairus and his family echo through the centuries to us. Jesus can say of you someday, arise. And if he does, and you get up, there's no more death again after that. It is done. It is finished. It's the end of death and the end of pain and the end of all the mess.
Amen.
It is the words that we crave to hear one day, unless, of course, he comes back now, and then that'd be awesome. But barring him splitting the sky open right now, which God, you can do that right now. Let's just pray. Once again, Jesus, would you come right now? We'd be really, really happy. Amen? Yeah. Okay, so barring that happening, we will die. And the question is, will he say, rise? To you. To you. And if you're not sure he's going to say the words, arise to you, we need to talk about that today. And fix it today. Right now, because that is the most important question you will ever have in your life to answer. Will Jesus say, arise to you? Because if he does, just as sure as this girl got up and walked and had dinner, you will get up and walk and have dinner.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah.
And what a dinner it is going to be!
Yeah.
So here's the challenges. Here's the questions. First of all, is Jesus going to say to you? Do you want to know for sure today that Jesus will say that to you? That someday Jesus will say, arise, and you will get to be with him. If you want to know the answer to that question, when we're singing, when we're at the end, I'm going to be sitting right here. Please come talk to me. Or if that's embarrassing, you wait till later. I don't care when you talk to me. Talk to me. So we can answer this question. Number 2, if you're experiencing loss right now, and look, loss takes a lot of forms. I was talking with someone this morning who's experiencing loss, and it's not in a way that I expected to be talking towards this morning, but they're having some loss. I don't know what loss you're facing today, and I don't know if you're in the midst of it today, and I don't know if you're still wrestling today. Here's Jesus' words, not mine. Do not fear, believe. It might be hard right now. I'm telling you, Jesus says, do not fear, believe. There is an anchor that we're supposed to grab onto, and it requires faith, and we may not understand, but I'm telling you that the core of our hope is simply to trust in God that he has a plan, and sometimes there is nothing else to say. There's nothing else to say. So don't fear, believe. Sometimes that is it. That's all we got. And if you are there, let me just encourage you, if that is where you are, I'm praying with you. I want to support you. We will stand around you. We will hold you up. We will bear with you. We will not ridicule. We will not laugh. We will not scoff. We will not make little of your pain. But we will hold around you and we will just in tears encourage you. Do not fear, only believe. Let us be with you. Here's my last challenge. Maybe right this second you're not in a season of loss. Not everybody is all the time. If we were all the time, I think we'd be a mess. Chances are pretty high someone in your life is. Chances are really high that you know someone living in that right now. So at the end of this, and you're thinking about what to do with this message, could I encourage you this way? Make a commitment right now and ask God to show you how you can be an encouragement to them. How you can pray for them. But beyond praying, what can you do for them practically? Can you serve them in some way? Can you just send them a phone call? Can you do something fun with them that they like to do? What can you do in reality for someone who's in loss right now? Don't leave this on the page or say, well, that's happening to someone else. That isn't my problem right now. As a family, as a body, even if I'm not the one going through that, I should be listening to what God's telling me to do about that. So no matter who you are in this room, whether you need to meet Jesus for the first time, whether you're experiencing loss and you just need encouragement, or whether you're someone who needs to do the encouraging bit, we all have an assignment. We all have somewhere we can move from here. This is a story of a man who started with faith. He believed. And in the midst of that story, it gets rough. It gets hard to have faith. It gets nearly impossible to have faith. It gets downright crazy. And in the midst of that, Jesus says, don't fear, believe. And Jesus stays with him till the end. And his hope and his faith are rewarded with the truth that Jesus still loves and he cares and he did have a plan. That hasn't changed, and it never changes. Whether we get that exact outcome or not, Jesus doesn't leave us, and he stays with it till the end, and he brings to us peace, and he brings to us healing, and he brings to us what we need to get on and to move on. The story is us. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, I feel for Jairus. He's been dead a long time now, thousands of years, and yet I read his story, Lord, and I connect with him. I feel him. I get it. Lord, in our lives, as we face loss and we face questions, and Lord, would you help us to hear that repeated command of Christ, do not be afraid, only believe. Would you help us to hold on? Lord, if there's someone in our lives that is struggling to hold on, would you cause us to just come around them in love, to come around them in support, not offering superficial phrases, but real life, genuine comfort, that we would weep with those who weep, that we would cry with those who cry, we would feel the oppression with those who are oppressed, that we would feel the loss with those who feel lost, and we would just be there with people so that folks in our community wouldn't have to go through this alone. Lord, if there is any person in this room who is not absolutely certain that there will be a day that Jesus says, arise, my child, would you give them the courage to come up here and talk with me right now? Because there is nothing more amazing that could happen today than for a soul to be added to the kingdom of heaven and for someone to have the assurance of how much you love them. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.